do that now. So that's what LEED stands for, and that's what LEED does. It's a simple third-party standard for the public to know that they're actually getting a green building out of their investment. As I said, just like your steel-toed boots, just like how clean a restaurant is, this is to make sure the building is actually doing something good for society, the environment, and the public. And I like it because it's legitimate. What I mean by that, it's by professionals, so by people like me who are in the industry. And people like me who are in the industry know what can be realistically done on a building. So LEED isn't generally asking us the craziest amount to do, but it's much better than most of our building codes. And when you make the commitment to go green, that happens early in the project, which is good, because from then on out, at least people will be thinking about how their design decisions affect the sustainability of the building. And most importantly, this thing's marketable. They have spent a lot of money on publicizing what LEED means. Because frankly, if nobody knew what it was, who would care? But the public gets what it means, and we're demanding it more and more from our built environment. I should have introduced myself. My name is Melodie. I graduated from the University of Toronto in civil engineering, as I mentioned earlier. And how I got here, how I got involved in LEED, after my freshman year, I worked at this an engineering firm, and they were building our service centers along the en route. They're called en route service centers to fill up and get a snack and whatnot. And they were all going for LEED Silver. And that was the project I was working on. And I had no idea what LEED meant back then, but I saw it was this way to define what makes a green building actually good. And I thought that was kind of neat and missing in the industry. And then I saw you could personally get accredited by taking a couple exams, which I thought was an awesome way to get ahead in something I finally actually found interesting for me. And back then, you actually needed to work on a LEED project to take this exam called the LEED Green Associate or the LEED AP. And so I was very lucky and fortunate to be working on this LEED project to make me eligible. And I had a very luxurious task on those projects. I single-handedly designed all of their RV waste stations, which, if you know what that is, it's a hole in the ground if you have a big RV to dump its human waste out of. Gross, but that's my claim to fame. I guess it's kind of sustainable if you think about it. Don't think about it though. And after that, I took the exams, I passed them, and I really went full throttle into the LEED world, into sustainability. Since then, I've been working at a number of consulting firms, and now I focus on training primarily students on passing their LEED Green Associate exams. And so for the last about 10 years now, I travel to 100 universities each year to host this workshop, because unfortunately these courses are really geared towards professionals, and they're usually like $1,000. And so I just do it for students on my own at $150 for students to prepare them for this exam and get them involved in this industry, because I think money is a silly constraint for something we need to drive more people into. And I'll talk more about that later, and I'll try to bring in some real examples of how it works in life today. So that's enough about me. And I thought we'd talk a little background of sustainability and how we can really look at our past and how we used to build before we really relied on our fancy electrical consuming devices, and how those are some of the most sustainable buildings ever, because, well, they don't use much energy at all. And so here we have the Pantheon, a very famous building, and there's some neat features on it. You see this open circle here called the oculus. That's a source of daylight, which actually illuminates the entire room. And any rain that falls is caught below and collected below the floors and reused. Here, this is actually in Colorado, where the mountain was used for passive solar design to block the unwanted heat from the high summer sun, but allow free, low-angled solar heat gain, which could still be used today. These are some of the most basic natural buildings ever. A wigwam, an igloo. These literally use nature and fit in with nature instead of trying to combat the elements that it's throwing at us. And we can really learn from a lot of the ways that we used to build. And these are just some modern passive techniques. You know, in days like this on the East Coast, very, very rarely during the year, it doesn't cool down too much at night, and it doesn't heat up too much during the day, more like a West Coast kind of climate. And at that point, we might not need air conditioning. We might not need heating. If we placed our windows and our openings at the correct place, we could duct in cold air from the north side of the building and out the south, the hot side. Here are those overhangs I just mentioned, allowing warm low-angled sun's heat in the winter and blocking high-angled summer sun's heat. And like these can be applied to current and modern buildings, which some are, but not, certainly not well enough. And we know why we're here and why LEED exists. Never been a point in time where carbon dioxide levels have been higher on our planet. And we also know that leads to the greenhouse gas effect of trapping in our carbon dioxide and heating the planet, causing some adverse effects such as warming our air, warming our water, creating more vicious hurricanes and the costs and damages from those hurricanes. Drought across the globe, we're having trouble with it. Water scarcity, and water is not an unlimited resource. It's a finite amount of fresh water, which we'll talk about. And just some more air pollution that we can really deal with. And LEED is a good way to at least start tackling a few parts of this big problem. But when you boil it down, a lot of people are still naysayers out there, climate change deniers, whatever they want to be, they can be. But the way I kind of frame this argument is, look, we're on a planet, it's been generous enough to share its resources with us, but they're finite. We're going to run out of fossil fuels. We're going to run out of things like water. And frankly, if we continue our consumption rate, it's not sustainable because not only will the price rise as our demand increases and supply decreases, but it's just short-sighted because we're going to run out of them. So whether you climate change, people believe in it or not, this is still factual. This is going to affect them in their daily life. We're going to run out of our resources that we depend on, so we might as well conserve them and use them at a better rate. That's how I look at it. Then there's the buzzword of the 21st century, sustainability. Every company is sustainable nowadays. For some reason, oil companies' websites think they're the most sustainable. I'm not sure how that works, but interesting. And really, what does it mean? And I like framing it in the way of we don't inherit the earth from our ancestors, but we borrow it from our children. Really thinking that there's future generations that are going to rely on our consumption rate, and we better preserve it for them to live a good life. Looking at where our energy actually is used, you might be surprised that in the East Coast and Northeast, 50% of our buildings are using energy for heating, just heating. Then we have cooling, lighting, plug loads as the remaining major factors. But heating is a huge, huge consumer of energy. And I always like these kind of thought-provoking pictures. Looking at, two different buildings from a very different time period, what do you think uses less energy? And of course, you might be surprised that this building in 1864, it has an R value, just a 4 R value, which isn't very good. That's how good of an insulator it is, and a 30% window to wall ratio. So its facade is made up of only 30% windows. Versus our modern building, which is all glass, wonderful glass, the worst insulator we could ever build with. And unfortunately, you can see in Long Island City and a lot of these new constructions, these glass towers that are going up. And even if you use the triple pane argon-filled glass, it doesn't come close to a basic insulating property of a wall. So having a good balance between windows and walls and where they're placed is really going to impact our overall ongoing energy consumption. And it's why we shouldn't use as much glass as we do. And this is a funny one. People often don't spot the difference between these two, but on our right we have a commercial building over here and a residential building. And really the only difference is they're both glass boxes, which is not the ideal way to build. But the reason why our residential buildings use more energy is partly because of how we design them. Our balconies our floors are laid in a concrete slab and it's continuous. If we were smart, we'd have a nice break between that slab and the outdoors in our balcony, but unfortunately, it just acts as a huge thermal bridge and just drags all of our energy right out to the air and ups our energy costs as we go on. So there are very solvable problems. We just need to be aware of them and actually work with how to prevent them. And so we're going to talk about LEED as being the answer to a lot of these sustainable building issues. And we're not doing and overlooking. And how LEED works, it's a point system. So there's a number of points each building can achieve, 110 total points. And depending on how many they pursue and are awarded, they get their building certified. So 40 points is certified, 50 is silver, gold is 60, and platinum is 80. And I'm sure all of you have seen these plaques before. Pretty much every new building in New York City is going for at least LEED silver today is what I see. But New York is one of the best. And often people don't think about the costs related to going green, but as a percentage cost, it hurts the least in New York because these green items that we're going to use, energy efficiency, green roofs, and we'll talk about a lot of these items, but they're going to cost the same amount to do in a building in St. Louis versus a building in New York, more or less. But the New York building is worth 2 or 3 times as much as a St. Louis building. So as a percentage of a relative cost of building, it hurts a lot less in New York because the asset is so expensive compared to St. Louis. Nothing wrong with St. Louis, that's how it works. And that's why often people don't think about the economic part of this, but the more expensive your building is, the less of the relative cost going green is. And that's something I like to talk about. How you get the points. So there's a number of categories, 9 of them we'll talk about. In each category, there's these mandatory minimums called prerequisites. You got to meet them all. Then you choose what credits you want to pursue for your building, and depending on how many credits determines the points and eventually the award, which we'll see. These are the categories that I'm going to talk a little bit about as we go on, and there's 110 total points within them. But why has LEED been adopted so much throughout North America and honestly globally now? LEED is a really big deal. And a big part of that was showing developers and owners that going green doesn't have to mean cash money green. And there's a lot of times when a LEED certified building doesn't cost that much more than just a basic code built building. But usually it's about 1 to 3% more on the initial cost, which seems like nothing. But on a $100 million building, 1 to 3 million bucks is still something to most people. So why bother with it? Why go for it if it does cost more? Well, there's 2 ways we get a good return on that 1 to 3% investment. The indirect way is the marketability. So why does like TD Bank and a lot of other banks and a lot of companies and universities only build LEED buildings from now on? It strengthens something called our corporate social responsibility program. So you might come here to do business with me because our sustainability values align. And that's important in 2020 when people are making their decisions on where to go to school and who to do business with. But the real tangible evidence and the hard return is simply through our costs over time. And this chart really sums it up well. A red building just built to code, the lowest initial cost. Over time, we're going to require more energy, more water, more maintenance. It's not the best built building, it's just built the lowest code. But a green building, sure, you're paying a little more money up front, but over time, you're less vulnerable to fluctuations of energy and water prices, simply just because you're using less of the stuff. And maybe you can even sell some electricity back to the grid and recoup some more of our investment. So has anybody seen this pretty picture before? I'm sure some of your courses have touched on it. It's called the triple bottom line, the 3 Ps, whatever you want, I don't care. And this is how we really look at sustainability, especially in LEED. So we group our Earth into these 3 big spheres. There's the profit economy, the people society, and the planet environment. And what I'm hoping our building is able to do is satisfy a lot of these spheres, wants and needs. And that profit side is what we just touched on with our high return on our investment. But what about us? We, the people, are in these buildings all day, every day, and we're demanding green buildings. We're demanding them because they're healthier to be in. People are more comfortable, they're more productive, and that's where we want to spend our time. And frankly, if you look at the major cultural shift over the years, Earth Day, Earth Hour, they weren't even around 30 years ago. Now they're completely a part of our culture. Sustainability is in the classroom from a very young age. And after all, it's a brand new job market for people like us. We've had the blue collar, the white collar industry. Now there's this green collar industry. It's here to stay. It's growing rapidly and good to get involved in today, which I hope you guys do. And after all, it's our future, so we should probably not mess things up. And here are some cute babies over there. Now, That's the people side, and the planet side we did touch on. But frankly, there is only one Earth. Let's do our best not to destroy it. Let's preserve it for at least 1 or 2 more generations, I hope, by reversing our contribution to climate change, and we'll talk about that too. Depending on where you're at, there's sometimes actual incentives to ease the financial cost of going green. So in New York City, we have Plan YC. That's a really new idea and an important one. There's the Green Roof Bylaw now. In Toronto, where I'm from, we have the Toronto Green Standard, in which if you reach the second level, the tier 2 of a sustainability rating in Toronto, you get 25% of your permitting fees back, which is like 800 grand. I know de Blasio introduced a new idea to, by 2030, if your building is within the bottom 10% of their class in terms of energy efficiency, you must retrofit it and improve it, or else you're going to get fined. So there's a lot of these different policies that are coming out. Unfortunately, not as common as I'd like them to be, but they exist, and they're going to make it easier to build green in the future, which is nice. And LEED's not alone. There's a lot of green building ratings out there. There's BREEAM in the UK. There's the Living Building Challenge is another cool one in North America, much more stringent than LEED. There's BBC in France, ENEV in Germany. But the reason why LEED is the most popular globally is because it's realistic. It's not asking us the craziest amount. And it's the same everywhere. So LEED is the same in every province, state, country, globally. And specifically multinational companies like that because they can keep their building programs consistent to a global audience, which is nice. Now, there's really two sides of LEED. The one side that I've really gone into detail with is the buildings, and they're the ones that get certified. Depending on their points, they get the plaque. But the people, we get accredited. So buildings, we say, are certified, people are accredited, and there's actually 3 levels of accreditation for us. And maybe you've seen my emails about my Green Associate webinars and workshops that I've held in the past in New York and now online. And the Green Associate is level 1. It's the first LEED designation. If you want to show employers and show clients you have this certified knowledge in sustainability, that's the one to start off with. It gets your foot in a lot of doors you probably didn't know were even open for you. And that's what I primarily teach myself. And so the reason why a lot of people take these workshops with me is they want a nice resume booster, which, don't get me wrong, it is a very good resume booster. But if you look in New York, all these developers are asking for their buildings to be LEED certified. And if I'm a company bidding on those projects and I want to get that contract, and as a company I can say, look, 90% of my staff or all of my staff have their LEED Green Associate. We know what we're doing. It's a lot easier to get those projects. And you having this under your belt makes it a lot easier to get those coveted positions, no matter what industry you end up in. And even not just engineers and architects and interior design, but even like JP Morgan's whole real estate and analyst team, they want to know where their money is going when they invest in LEED. So even they get the LEED Green Associate, which I've worked with. So it's a really diverse range of different industries that work with buildings and development that do go into LEED. So that's the first level, the Green Associate. And then the second level is the AP, the Accredited Professional. And that's a lot more technical in nature. It's for people that are really going to be working directly with LEED buildings. And there's different specialties, which we'll talk about shortly. But personally, for example, I'm a BD&C, which is for new buildings, and an O&M for existing building retrofits. And the fellow is just this honorary designation that people can get if they've done something special in the industry for a long time. Now, who actually created LEED is always a question I get, and it's the United States Green Building Council. So nearly every country nowadays have their own Green Building Council, and the USGBC is one of the largest ones. And they're the ones that create LEED. They're the ones that constantly update LEED and decide what actually is going to go into these LEED buildings to make them green. They create what's called our rating systems. They also produce our Bibles of LEED, the reference guides, 800 wonderful pages telling you exactly one step at a time how to build a LEED building. And all of our information and proof is actually submitted through LEED Online. So even pre-pandemic, it was still going through LEED Online, and all of our designs, our pictures, our proof is submitted through it, and the Green Business Certification Inc. review it all. So they're the ones that actually review what we did and made sure it was built properly. And they also write our exams to get the LEED Green Associate, which is what I prepare you for. On a big picture though, there's one thing that's for sure on this planet. Our population is rising pretty quickly. The only thing I can see going up faster is our demand for energy globally. More people need it, more people want it and have access to it. How are we ever going to keep up? There's only two things we can do. We're either going to create more sources of it or use less of it overall. But the way to look at it is for every 1 kilowatt hour of energy more we need every year, it is 3 to 100 times more expensive to create it, whether it's nuclear, coal, renewables, it doesn't matter how you're generating it. Rather than saying, hey, wait, where do we use that 1 kilowatt hour of energy today? And let's reduce our consumption of it instead. So I'm saying it's way cheaper to reduce where we use rather than building up brand new capacity to meet our demands. And if it's cheaper and more economical to reduce consumption, you might as well start out with the biggest consumers on the planet, our beautiful buildings. Up to 72% of our electricity, 50% of our energy, and 38% of our carbon dioxide emissions come from buildings. So if this is the largest fruit on the energy consumption tree, might as well tackle it first and try to reduce it, rather than generating new sources. Now in real life, a combination of the two is going to be great, but it's a lot cheaper to reduce where we use at the end of the day. So let's focus on that, which is my attitude. And one thing I really like LEED doing is they were creating this rating system and they said, why are we making all these guidelines and our own tools when there are plenty of guidelines and standards and tools that we can piggyback off of? And a very common one that you've probably heard of is the life cycle assessment, life cycle costing, analyzing the entire life of a product or building's impact. What was the impacts at raw material extraction, manufacturing, transporting it, using it, and the impact as a whole as a way to actually compare products and buildings. And so one thing I like LEED for doing is they take these proven tools that are generally underused in the industry and apply it to the buildings. No reinventing the wheel is what I'm getting at. They use already working tools. This is just a brief general idea of how LEED decides which credits are worth 1 versus 5 points. And so the more a credit says reverses contribution to climate change or enhances human health and well-being, protects our water, our biodiversity, a greener economy, and just social equity improvements, this is how LEED has decided what to make a credit worth. And just some background knowledge that I wanted to share. Now, how did the plaque get on the wall that you've seen? The first step is a developer registers the project, and the person who registers it is known as the project administrator, and that's usually somebody like me. So that's a LEED consultant or a sustainability consulting firm. Just Google this in New York or in any city in America. You are going to see pages of results. This is a big business now. There's a lot of demand for it, so there's a lot of people like me that do this. And as a project administrator, I create LEED Online, for my own building, my own project. And through LEED Online, I'm kind of capturing everything I need from all the different stakeholders in my project. So I'll say things like, hey owner, I need your signature to approve credit 1, architects your drawings for 2, engineers your calculations for 3, or drawings for 4. And it's a way of collecting the proof that we built it properly. Here's a scorecard, which is a list of all the credits available. And one thing I really like LEED for doing is recognizing that different buildings have different needs. So today we have 5 different, sorry, one second, I'm just going to turn this off. So we have 5 different what's called rating systems to apply to different building types. And this is the first one. It's called BD&C, or Building Design and Construction, and it's for new buildings. Most buildings under LEED, 90% of them have gone under BD&C because the easiest thing to build green, honestly, is a brand new building. And within BD&C, there's these adaptations for warehouses, retail, hospitals, And they just have a few unique points that just pertain to their buildings, but they're very similar, and B, D, and C is for new buildings. Our second rating system, oh, so that's B, D, and C. And there's also rating systems that I'll touch on right now, such as operations and maintenance for existing building retrofits. There's also interior design and construction, homes just for single family homes or buildings below 8 stories, and neighborhood development. The most familiar one is probably the Hudson Yards project, which is a LEED Gold neighborhood. It's actually the 4th LEED neighborhood in New York City. And they're much larger projects dealing with amenities being shared, walkability, sharing energy resources, a mixed use, really sustainable development. But they're huge projects, so there's not that many of them. B, D, and C is the one that I talk about the most because it's the most common. It's the one you're going to see in real life a lot. So I mentioned there's the prerequisites. So those are the mandatory things you have to do in each category. And the reason they exist is because, you know, water is pretty cheap in New York and Toronto. And I might be building a building and say, who cares about the water efficiency? I'm going to focus on energy. That's where my real money savings is. But you cannot do that in LEED. LEED is a whole building rating system. And for that reason, we have minimums of 20% water efficiency, 5% energy efficiency. You have to bring in this much fresh air. So once you've completed all categories prerequisites, you have this kind of minimum level of sustainability. And then you can say, okay, LEED, you know what, I did it. I'm 20% more water efficient because you made me do it. But now I'm going to focus on what I care about. And the credits is where you focus on that. So we decide what credits our building and our stakeholders want. We decide based on how much the credit's going to cost, how important it is to you, how many points you'll get if you do that credit. So the credits are up to us, and all the prerequisites are mandatory. Now I'm just going to briefly touch on the categories. So our first category is worth 1 point, and it's about the integrative design process. So the idea of we have engineers, architects, and so many stakeholders from general contractors to 30 subcontractors, and people tend to work isolated. We don't want that to happen. We need people working together. We need collaboration to figure out how different designs affect each other. And if you can understand everybody's individual goals, you can reach the overall goal of the building in a much more cost-effective and efficient manner. And that's where this comes in. Get everybody together, essentially. Work together. Our next one's all about your location and how people get to the building. So in here, we have credits that deal with things like protecting farmland. We're protecting any sensitive areas. Developing on a previously developed site, not a brand new green field. We're talking about locating in a downtown dense core rather than the middle of nowhere upstate New York. And then also 4 credits all trying to discourage people from driving alone in a gas guzzler to our future building, such as locating near public transit, making it easy to bike, making it easy to drive green vehicles and carpool. And that's our location and transportation. Our next one looks at the actual site itself. And so we try to control construction pollution. We're trying to maximize open space, which is accessible, that we can use and be outside. We're trying to reduce the heat island effect, the fact that New York City is much hotter in the summer than our rural and residential counterparts because of all of our dark hardscapes and asphalt. We're trying to manage our rainwater on site and perhaps reuse it for our toilet water or irrigation. We're encouraging green roofs to be built, which, as I mentioned, in Toronto and New York, we have the green roof bylaw that a certain percentage has to be vegetated. And reduce light pollution, a constant problem in cities. And that's sustainable sites to touch on. Water efficiency, we talked about it. We're going to run out of water. There's not unlimited fresh amounts. And in this category, we're looking at reducing potable or drinkable water usage. So we look at indoors, from toilets to showers to faucets. We look at outdoors, from not spraying water to irrigate above ground, and xeriscaping using indigenous species to the land, and metering our water usage as well. And that's where we're trying to address our potable water usage issues. And energy is the biggest one. It is crazy to see how far ahead Canada and the US are behind the rest of the world. We use the most energy per person, and there's a few simple reasons for it. Relative costs of energy are low here. We have really cold winters and really hot summers, and fortunately, a lot of our population, most of it, has access to energy consumption and energy devices. And all those three make us way ahead of the pack in terms of energy usage. How you should look at this, and I look at this, is what a time to be alive. This is the biggest and easiest time to start improving our very, very bad energy usage rates per person. And that's where we come in. This is the easiest time. Lucky us. There's your Canadian optimism to get started. Oh, here's a pretty picture of me before I started traveling, and now I look like this. Big PV array. And in this category, so we have 4 prerequisites, 4 credits, and 3 extra credits as well. So here we're looking at commissioning, which is having a third party verify that our equipment is installed properly, that it will work properly. We talk about energy modeling, and if you haven't been exposed to that, it's a huge industry. Now it's becoming more and more mandatory in different areas for your permit, showing and proving that this is how my building is going to use its energy, and comparing that to a baseline to try to reduce it. We talk about refrigerants like Freon and CFCs and HCFCs, which are used in our cooling and heating systems, and they're not good for the environment. We also talk about metering our energy, a demand response program, which you are working with the utility to shed energy at the real peak hour demands. We talk about installing renewable energy on site with solar and wind, geothermal, as well as off site. And that's where energy and atmosphere really focuses on. Our next category is all about our materials. Where does it come from? Are they created sustainably? We want to be able to have some control over the standards of how all of these products we're using in our buildings are manufactured. Because as I talked about the life cycle, we're talking about the entire life of the building. We want to know where it's coming from and where it goes at the end of its life. We want people to be able to recycle on site. We want to divert our construction debris away from the landfill and actually reuse it. And a lot of this category is actually focused on the manufacturers themselves and trying to have them follow sustainable practices in their factories. Our next one's all about the indoor. And this has been talked a lot about since COVID. There's been different credits. Different codes have taken advice from these LEED credits because they want to have a higher turnover rate of their HVAC systems. They want to bring in more fresh air, and LEED already does that. So that's a nice thing about LEED. It's always ahead of the code, so the code is able to draw on certain elements of it. So this is talking about how comfortable are you inside the building? How productive can you be? How healthy is it to breathe that air inside the building day in and day out? We're talking about, do you have views to the outdoors? Do you have daylight coming in while still balancing it with the integrity of our envelopes insulating property? Can you hear me well, or do I hear my voice bouncing off all the walls? Acoustical performance. This is all about the indoor environmental and air quality that we're experiencing. And then there's these 2 kind of bonus categories, innovation and design, in which you can actually create your own credit that's not in the rating system and actually use that as a point if it's good for the environment, economy, and or society. There's also testing pilot credits out to show if future versions should use this a sample credit or not, and a LEED AP. I'm worth a whole point on these projects if I work on them. And there's also regional factors. So a building in New York does not have the same priorities as a building in LA. So for example, in LA, the water credits all get an extra point tacked onto them because we want to encourage developers in LA to especially reduce their water usage. So each zone, so upstate New York and then New York City, has 2 different sets of regional priority credits. So it does take into account where you're located, which is nice. So I know there's a ton of information that I just got through here in a very short amount of time, so thank you for sticking with me. And a few things I want to stress is that we can really learn from our past. We saw the way we built for thousands and thousands of years before we relied on all of our fancy energy consuming devices. I'm not saying go back to that, but I'm saying use some principles from that because we can apply them or variations of them in our buildings today. Also, LEED is not the answer to all the world's problems, but it's a good start for a couple big ones. And every few years a new version comes out, so LEED version 4 is still relatively new and it ups the ante each new version every few years. And eventually as we continue to push that envelope, it will be the answer to a couple major energy related issues I believe we have today. Also, you got to focus on how much the values in LEED make sense. There are times where I look at LEED, and you probably saw back when I was explaining the categories, like, that's just the most logical way to build buildings and to develop our earth, and you are totally right. But historically, especially in our design and construction industries, we love taking shortcuts, and encouraging us to build it right the first time round is the way we got to go. And LEED makes sure we do that by incentivizing us with points to get to that level of certification. But a huge factor is everybody's got to really work together and get that best building that we can build, knowing where everybody's design lies. So that was a lot of info. And all that to say, I also, if this was interesting to you, I would love to have you in one of my webinars coming up. So as I mentioned, Laura, thank you for bringing me on. I really appreciate it. Laura came to mind in February, and I guess she didn't hate it since she asked me here, so that's a nice thing. And so now I've been doing webinars about twice a month. My next one is coming up actually less than a week away. I'm September 30th at 5 o'clock. It's gonna look exactly like this. This is how I set it up, which is pretty nice. I can't imagine the struggles that some of your older professors are having with the Zoom University nowadays. So I hope this was a little more engaging than that, and maybe even funnier and enjoyable. Now, so I do these webinars, and they're live webinars just like this. You only have to come to one of them. They're all identical, just me on a different day, so I might look a little different. Maybe I'll have a beard. Or I also offer them online. So everybody's schedules are wild this year, as you know. So I also have it recorded, and you can participate in a self-paced version. And the cost of it is $200, but for SEA members, I'm giving you this coupon code GREEN that you can use for $50 off. And the real reason you're doing this is the pass rate's not that high on the exam. And everybody who's taken my course so far and followed my study steps has passed on their first try. And so how it works, it's a 4 to 5 hour lecture like this. It's been going a little longer lately. And after the lecture, you read my textbook, reinforces what you learn in the lecture, and then you do my 4 practice exams until you get my targeted score, and then you're ready to take the real exam. And the real exam, it used to have to be taken in person, which is no longer the case. You can actually take the exam online, and I really encourage you to do this as a student because it's not that hard. It's usually people study a week or two over Thanksgiving, over Christmas break, and it's not that hard. And the exam for full-time students is $100, and normally it's $250, so they just reduced it. So I encourage people to get this out of the way as a student because once you pass it forever. You don't have to retake the exam, and it gets harder every few years. So get out of the way now. It's $150 for the course, $100 for the exam. And if anybody has any questions, you are more than welcome to unmute your mic, or if you're more comfortable, you can just type it in chat, and I'm happy to discuss anything with you. Otherwise, that's all for me. So thank you for coming, and thank you again, Laura, for organizing this. I do appreciate it. And I'll upload the recordings on YouTube to make it easy for anybody to access. Okay, and feel free to share it too.
I will also say thank you so much for making this amazing presentation. I do have to say I participated, he said, back in February, like one of his last workshops, and I'm telling you, even those like 4 or 5 hours, he talks a lot of interesting things. Like you won't believe how many things he can